The storm rolled in without mercy, throwing sheets of rain against the bay as the ferry pulled alongside the weather-beaten pier. The wind carried the briny scent of the Pacific, and each gust seemed to push the world deeper into a haze of gray. Most passengers hurried down the gangway with their heads bowed, eager to escape the chill. Among them was a lone figure who didn't seem to hurry. She stepped onto the slick planks with the steady gait of someone entirely unfazed by the cold bite of the rain. A leather jacket, worn and softened by years of use, clung to her shoulders. A duffel bag hung from one arm, her boots clicking against wet wood as if marking time to a silent rhythm. To a casual observer, she might have seemed like another wanderer, one of the countless drifters who came through the coastal city with no more than the clothes on their back. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, watchful, and far too calculating for someone aimlessly passing through. Her destination was no ordinary stop. The massive gates of Naval Base Coronado loomed ahead, its perimeter lined with fencing and security cameras. The guards at the checkpoint noticed her long before she reached them. A civilian approaching this base was rare enough. One walking with such deliberate calm was rarer still. "Ma'am, stop right there," a guard called out, his voice carrying over the rain. Claire Voss didn't break stride. Only when she was within a few steps did she reach into her jacket, moving slowly, and pull out an old military ID. The guard took it, his brow furrowing. "This says Lieutenant Claire Voss. Issued 8 years ago, expired 3 years back. You can't." He didn't finish. 2 military police officers approached from behind, their boots splashing through shallow puddles. One pressed a finger to his earpiece, listening to something only he could hear. His eyes narrowed. "That's enough," the taller MP said firmly, stepping forward. "Claire Voss, you're under arrest for impersonating a naval officer, specifically a Navy SEAL. You have the right to remain silent." She offered no resistance. In fact, the faintest flicker of relief crossed her face. The world shifted to fluorescent light and the smell of bleach. Claire sat across from a steel table in an interrogation room, her wrists cuffed to a metal ring. Opposite her sat Commander Frank Danner, a man whose 30 years in uniform had carved both deep lines in his face and an unshakable skepticism into his gaze. "So, you're telling me you were a SEAL?" Danner asked, leaning forward. "We've checked the rosters for your claimed service years. Not a single woman appears on any SEAL team record." "That's because the records you can access," Claire replied evenly. "Don't tell the whole story." Danner smirked. "Convenient excuse. We get people like you all the time. Read a book or two, memorize some jargon, think they can bluff their way through. But you—" He paused, almost reluctantly. "You haven't made a single rookie mistake." Her eyes flicked to the one-way mirror. She knew someone else was watching. Moments later, the door swung open. The air in the room seemed to tighten as Admiral Marcus Hale stepped inside. His uniform was immaculate, his chest a wall of ribbons and medals. Authority radiated from him like heat. "At ease," Hale said quietly. His eyes never left Claire. "Remove the cuffs." Danner hesitated. "Sir, I said remove them." The cuffs clicked open. Hale circled the table, stopping beside her. "Roll up your left sleeve." She obeyed. Inked into her skin was a tattoo unlike any common SEAL insignia, a subtle variation known only to a handful of people in the world. Danner's brows pulled together. "Sir, what is that supposed to mean?" Hale's voice was steady. "It means this woman is exactly who she says she is." The room felt smaller after Admiral Marcus Hale's words. Commander Danner leaned back in his chair, trying to process the declaration. A moment ago, Claire Voss had been nothing more than another pretender with a forged ID. Now, by the Admiral's own admission, she was someone real, someone dangerous. But the strangest part was how she sat there, calm and silent, as if none of this surprised her. "She wasn't always Claire Voss," Hale began, speaking not for her benefit but for Danner's. "When I first met her, she was just Voss, a 19-year-old recruit from the outskirts of Detroit. No family to speak of. No future that didn't involve dead ends and bad choices. She joined the Navy to escape a life going nowhere." Claire didn't move, but her eyes shifted toward the Admiral. She didn't correct him. He was telling the truth. Hale continued. From day one, she stood out. Not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she refused to break. Training instructors tried to push her past her limits, but every time they thought she'd give up, she came back harder. She had an instinct for survival and a way of seeing angles no one else did. It was during her second year that an unmarked folder landed on her commanding officer's desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words, Project Sentinel Candidate. Project Sentinel wasn't in any Navy manual. It didn't exist on any chart. It was an experimental unit formed to test whether extreme special operations training could be adapted for people outside the standard mold. No press. No recognition. Not even the usual classified paper trail. If you were chosen, you either made it through and vanished into the black, or you disappeared from the program forever. Claire was one of 6 recruits selected that year. They were stripped of ranks, names, and service records. The Navy didn't own them anymore, at least not on paper. The training was brutal. Days without sleep. Weeks of operating in hostile terrain, without support. The instructors didn't just push their bodies. They tried to break their minds. One by one, the others washed out. By the end of the year, only 2 candidates remained. Claire was one of them. Graduation wasn't a ceremony. It was a mission. A real one. They were deployed to intercept a rogue weapons shipment headed toward a warlord in Southeast Asia. No backup. No room for error. They succeeded, and for their trouble, they received something no one outside the unit would recognize. A modified seal trident tattoo, inked by a single artist under the strictest secrecy. It was the only proof they'd ever been there. For the next 5 years, Claire lived in the shadows. Her unit handled operations no one could acknowledge, black sites, deniable raids, the kind of work that never made headlines because the truth would cause more chaos than the threat they neutralized. But then came the mission. It was supposed to be a routine extraction. Infiltrate a hostile region, recover an asset, and return undetected. Her team inserted under cover of night, but the exfiltration went wrong. Very wrong. The asset was secured, but during the retreat, the enemy closed in. 2 members of her team were killed in the firefight. Another, Ethan Cole, her closest comrade, was wounded and cut off during the chaos. Command declared him killed in action after reviewing satellite footage showing heavy explosions in the area. But Claire never saw a body. She woke up 2 days later in a military hospital under an assumed name. The official story was simple. Project Sentinel was dissolved for operational security. Every record of her service, what little there had been, was scrubbed from existence. She was told to move on, disappear, and never speak of her past. That might have been the end. For most people, it would have been. But last year, Claire stumbled across a fragment of intercepted communication, one that made her blood run cold. It suggested Ethan Cole was alive. Not just alive, but in enemy custody. And worse, he knew things. Sensitive things. If his captors broke him, every SEAL team operating abroad could become a target overnight. She'd spent months quietly chasing rumors, bribing informants, and following dead ends. Finally, she tracked his location to a remote compound beyond friendly reach. There was no time to go through official channels. By the time bureaucracy cleared a mission, he'd be gone, or dead. That was why she was here now, staring across a steel table at Admiral Hale. "I can't do this alone," she said finally, her voice calm, but carrying an edge that came from living too long with a secret. "I need a team. The kind of people you can trust not to ask questions." Danner shook his head. "This is insane. You're asking for an unsanctioned op based on scraps of intel. If you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong," she interrupted. "I know Ethan. If he were dead, I'd feel it." Hale's jaw tightened. He'd led men and women into impossible situations before, but this was different. If he agreed, he'd be risking not just his career, but the careers and lives of anyone he brought in. Still, he remembered the missions where he'd trusted her judgment. Missions that should have failed but didn't because Claire Voss refused to lose. Finally, he spoke. "You'll have your team. But we move tonight." The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Claire Voss followed Admiral Hale out of the interrogation wing. The base felt different now, its sterile corridors alive with quiet urgency. Hale didn't speak as they moved, and neither did she. Words would only slow them down. They stopped in a small, windowless operations room. A single map of the Pacific region was pinned to the wall, dotted with colored markers. Claire scanned it automatically, her gaze zeroing in on one in particular, a red pin deep in hostile territory. "That's where he is?" she asked. Hale gave a short nod. "Remote compound, high walls, guarded day and night. Not a place you just stroll into." "I wasn't planning on strolling." Hale allowed himself the faintest of smiles before moving to the comms console. "I'm pulling in 3 people you've never met, but can trust with your life. They're ghosts like you." Within hours, the operatives began arriving. The first was Sam Rourke, a wiry man with a sniper's patience and a voice so quiet it seemed to disappear into the air. He had once served in reconnaissance units, where a single mistake meant vanishing forever. The second, Miguel Alvarez, was heavier built, with arms like coiled steel cables. He'd been a breacher, the kind of man who could dismantle a locked door or an armed opponent with the same efficiency. The last was Kara Wynn, a demolitions expert whose eyes carried the unnerving calm of someone who had worked with explosives long enough to see them as an extension of her own hands. They didn't ask questions when they walked in and saw Claire. They didn't need introductions. Hale had told them enough to know that if they were in the same room, it was for a reason. On the center table lay aerial photos of the compound, guard towers on each corner, a double perimeter fence, searchlights with overlapping coverage, patrol routes marked in neat red lines. Claire leaned over the images, tracing the map with a gloved finger. "We'll insert here," she said, pointing to a patch of jungle 2 clicks from the target. "Halo jump under radar. We approach from the east to avoid the floodlights. Security cameras here, and here, Sam. Those are yours." "Consider them gone," Rourke murmured. "Miguel, you take point on breaches. Kara, your charges will be last resort. Silent entry unless everything goes to hell." Kara smirked faintly. "It always goes to hell." Claire didn't argue. "Our extraction window is 20 minutes from breach. Longer than that, and we'll be pinned. I'll locate Ethan, cut him loose, and we all move together to the evac zone." She spoke with the kind of authority that didn't need to be shouted. Every instruction was clipped, precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't a plan made in a conference room. It was one drawn from muscle memory and scars. Hale watched from the corner, saying nothing until the briefing ended. "You all know what's at stake. This isn't sanctioned, and if you're caught, no one will come for you." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Rourke said, checking the bolt on his rifle. The transport jet was waiting by nightfall, its cargo bay open like the mouth of some steel beast. The inside smelled of oil and faint ozone, the constant hum of the engines vibrating through the deck. The team loaded their gear in silence. Claire strapped herself into a side seat, running her hands over the equipment. Her fingers lingered on the knife at her belt, a simple, black-handled blade Ethan had given her years ago. He'd told her then, "A blade's a promise. You only draw it if you mean to keep it." The jet roared into the night sky, climbing high above the ocean until even the moonlight seemed to fade. The rear ramp lowered, and the wind howled in, sharp and cold. Hale stood by the open edge. "You bring him back, Claire," he said, his voice nearly lost in the rush. She met his gaze, steady. "I will." The red jump light flicked on. One by one, the team stepped into the void, swallowed by the dark. The wind tore at them, the horizon a smear of shadows and distant lightning. Claire hit the ground hard, the impact rolling through her knees. She released the chute, letting it vanish into the undergrowth. The jungle closed in immediately, thick, wet, alive with the chirr of unseen insects. They moved without sound, slipping through the trees like wraiths. Every step was calculated, every pause precise. Sam took the lead when they reached the first clearing, scanning ahead through the scope of his suppressed rifle. 2 guards. 2 soft thuds later, and the way was clear. They reached the compound's outer fence in 20 minutes. Miguel crouched beside the gate, his hands working silently until the lock gave way with a faint click. Kara passed through first, planting a small jammer near the base of a security camera. Inside the perimeter, the air felt heavier. The glow of the guardhouse lights threw shifting shadows across the gravel. Claire could see the building where Ethan was likely kept, a squat structure toward the back, half hidden behind a fuel shed. She signaled with 2 fingers, then moved forward. The others followed, their shapes blending into the dark. A guard rounded the corner ahead, the sudden beam of his flashlight slicing through the gloom. Claire didn't think, she moved. In 2 silent strides, she had her knife at his throat, her hand over his mouth. He sagged to the ground without a sound. They were inside enemy territory now, and every second brought them closer to either saving Ethan Cole or joining him. The compound smelled of diesel and wet stone. Every sound, every drip of water, every rustle of leaves seemed louder inside the fence. Claire felt the air shift, the way it always did right before things turned violent. The building that housed Ethan Cole was only 30 meters ahead, its windows dark and barred. 2 guards stood near the entrance, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They weren't expecting trouble. That was their first mistake. Sam Rourke settled into a crouch, his rifle whispering twice in the night. Both men dropped where they stood, their bodies crumpling silently into the gravel. Claire motioned forward, keeping low as she crossed the open ground. Miguel Alvarez was already at the door, his gloved hands working the lock. It gave way with a muted click, and the heavy door swung inward. The inside was colder, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete. A single bulb buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across narrow hallways. Kara slipped past, her silenced pistol sweeping each corner before giving the all-clear. They reached a reinforced door at the far end. A keypad lock blinked in red. Claire studied it for a moment before pulling a small device from her belt. The jammer hissed faintly as it worked, and seconds later the lock clicked green. The door swung open, revealing a dimly lit room. A man sat chained to a metal chair, his head bowed. His beard was longer than she remembered, his frame thinner, but there was no mistaking him. "Ethan," she whispered. His head lifted slowly. His eyes widened. "Claire." His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "No time," she said, crossing to him and slicing through the restraints with her knife. "Can you walk?" "I can run," he rasped, pushing himself to his feet. They turned toward the hallway, and the world erupted in sound. Somewhere outside, a metallic clang rang out, followed by the blare of an alarm. Red lights began to strobe, bathing the corridor in flashes of warning. Kara swore under her breath. "We're blown." "Move," Claire barked, shoving Ethan toward Miguel. They broke into a run, boots pounding against the floor. The compound came alive with shouts and the thudding of feet. Searchlights swept wildly across the yard outside. Sam took position at a window, his rifle spitting controlled bursts. Guards fell, but more surged in to replace them. Miguel shouldered the exit door, splintering it open, and they spilled into the chaos outside. The air filled with gunfire, sharp and deafening. Bullets tore through the night, slamming into walls and churning up gravel. Claire felt one pass close enough to stir her hair. "North fence!" she yelled, signaling to Rourke. They sprinted toward the cover of a storage building, ducking behind its rusted walls. Kara knelt and tossed a small charge toward the nearest guard tower. The explosion was controlled, more flash than force, but it drew every eye in that direction. "Go, go, go!" Miguel bellowed, dragging Ethan along. They cut through the shadows, staying low. Claire covered their flank, her pistol barking in short, precise bursts. Every shot was placed with cold efficiency. The jungle loomed just beyond the fence, a black wall of safety if they could reach it. Sam was first to the breach point, dropping to one knee as he scanned for threats. Miguel passed Ethan through, then Kara slipped out after them. Claire was halfway through when a shout rang out behind her. She spun, firing twice. A guard stumbled, then fell, his rifle clattering against the dirt. More figures emerged from the gloom, their weapons raised. She could feel the heat of incoming rounds. "Claire!" Hale's voice echoed in her memory. "Bring him back." She dove through the gap in the fence, hitting the ground hard before scrambling to her feet. The jungle swallowed them instantly. "It's wet." Tangled darkness muffling the sounds of the compound. They didn't slow. Branches whipped at their faces, roots caught at their boots, but the team pushed forward. The extraction point was less than a kilometer away, and they had minutes before pursuit caught up. Behind them, the alarms wailed on, a fading reminder of the hornet's nest they'd stirred. Ethan stumbled once, and Claire caught his arm. "Stay with me," she said, her voice low but urgent. "I'm here," he panted. "You always did have the worst timing." They broke through the last line of trees to find the small clearing where their helicopter waited, its rotors already spinning. The pilot, face hidden by night vision goggles, waved them in. Miguel boosted Ethan aboard, followed by Kara and Sam. Claire was the last to climb in, turning just in time to see the first figures burst from the tree line, weapons flashing. Bullets sparked against the helicopter's frame as it lifted off, banking hard toward open sky. The compound below shrank to a blur of lights and smoke. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with adrenaline and unspoken relief. Ethan leaned back against the wall, eyes closing briefly. "Didn't think you'd come." Claire looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You would have done the same." The team sat in silence as the Pacific stretched out beneath them, the jungle and its dangers falling away behind. The mission wasn't over, not until Ethan was safe, and they were off the radar. But for now, they had won the only fight that mattered. And in the quiet thrum of the rotors, Claire let herself believe, just for a moment, that ghosts could still come back. The helicopter's engines hummed like a pulse through the cabin, a steady beat against the wild pounding in Claire's chest. The Pacific stretched out below, endless and black, its surface shimmering faintly under a waning moon. The air smelled faintly of fuel and ocean salt. No one spoke for the first 20 minutes. Each of them had the same thought. The farther they got from the compound, the safer they were, but only if the world never learned where they'd been. Ethan sat hunched against the cabin wall, the wind from the open side door ruffling his hair. The bruises on his face were stark against his pale skin. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert, like someone trying to process freedom after too long in a cage. "You're quiet," Claire said over the rotor noise. He gave a faint smile. "Thinking how many times I've imagined this, and how none of them were even close to reality." Claire's gaze drifted to the others, Rourke checking his rifle out of habit, Kara leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, Miguel scanning the sky as if expecting an ambush in midair. These were the kind of people you trusted without needing to ask why. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We'll be over friendly waters in 20. Sit tight." When the helicopter finally set down on a remote stretch of coastline, Hale was waiting. He stood alone, his uniform crisp even under the damp salt wind, a figure cut from both authority and shadow. Ethan was the first out, limping slightly as Miguel helped him down. Hale stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Welcome back, Chief Cole." Ethan gave a curt nod. "Sir." Hale's gaze shifted to Claire. "You pulled it off." "It wasn't clean," she replied, "but it's done." His eyes moved over the rest of the team. "You'll all be ghosts again by morning. No reports. No debriefs. This never happened." Rourke smirked faintly. "Wouldn't want it any other way." Hale dismissed the others with a nod. They melted into the darkness, one by one, until only Claire and the Admiral remained on the beach. The sound of the waves filled the space between them. "You could stay," Hale said finally. "I could push this through. Get you reinstated. No shadows this time." Claire almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "The world isn't ready for an official me, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it either. You'd have a team, resources, a place. I've had those things," she said, looking out over the ocean. "They don't last. The work does. The scars do. But the rest? It's borrowed time." Hale studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat. He held out a small, square box. "Then take this at least." She hesitated, then took it. The weight was solid, almost heavy for its size. She opened it to find a gold trident pin, polished until it caught the faint light like fire. Her throat tightened. "There's no record of me. No file. Not even a number." "No," Hale agreed. "But this says what paper never could. This says someone remembers. Claire closed the box carefully and slipped it into her jacket. You didn't have to do this. I did, Hale said simply. Because one day, someone will try to tell me that people like you don't exist, and I'll need to know they're wrong. The waves crashed softly against the shore, the tide pulling away with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Claire turned toward the distant lights of the ferry dock. Where will you go? Hale asked. Someplace quiet, she said. Someplace the storm hasn't found yet. She started walking, her boots sinking slightly into the damp sand. Hale didn't follow. He stood there until she disappeared into the night, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the surf. At the dock, the ferry was just pulling in, its deck lights casting a warm glow on the water. Claire boarded without looking back. She found a spot by the railing as the engines rumbled to life. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then steadier. It clung to her jacket, rolled down her face. She didn't mind. It felt like the right kind of rain, the kind that washed away the noise, leaving only what mattered. She thought of Ethan, now somewhere safe, hopefully with enough time to heal. She thought of the team, people who had stepped into danger without hesitation because she'd asked. She thought of Hale, standing alone on that empty beach, holding the truth in his hands like something fragile. The shoreline receded slowly into the mist. Ahead, the dark sea stretched on, vast and unknowable. Claire let the wind and the rain have their way, feeling the pull of the horizon. Some truths didn't need headlines. They didn't need medals or ceremonies. They only needed to be carried by the ones who'd lived them, passed quietly between those who understood. And so she carried hers, as she always had, without expectation, without fanfare. The ferry's horn sounded low and mournful, echoing across the water. Claire closed her eyes, letting it fade into the distance, and breathed in the salt air. Somewhere beyond the next storm, she would find her next horizon. But for tonight, it was enough just to keep moving forward.